Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me today. Today, I want to talk about Marsha P Johnson, the Stonewall Riots, and the birth of the LGBTQIA plus movement. First, I want to talk about Marsha P Johnson. She was a pioneer of the LGBT movement and a key figure in the Stonewall Riots. The P in her middle name actually stood for Pay It No Mind, and that was a reference to her gender. She self-identified as a drag queen, a transvestite, and as a gay man. Using today's terminology, she would most likely be described as non-binary, or perhaps gender fluid or gender non-conforming. In order to properly discuss this, we need to understand the culture in the United States in the 1960s. It was actually still illegal to be homosexual in 49 of the 50 states, and you could be arrested for displaying what was referred to as homosexual behavior. And this could be anything from holding hands with a same-sex partner to dancing together, kissing, of course, or anything like that. And it was also illegal to wear what they described as gender inappropriate clothing, where this would nowadays apply to transgender people. And if the police suspected you were wearing clothes that they, determined that were only appropriate for the opposite gender, you could actually be inspected. They could pull you over or walk up to you on the street and actually, require you to remove your clothing to see if, you were in fact trans, or what they referred to often back then as transvestites. And if you were, you could be arrested and thrown in jail for that. With the oppression and discrimination against the LGBTQIA plus community, the Mafia realized that they could exploit this for profit. So they purchased a lot of gay clubs in Greenwich Village, which was a popular area and safe haven for the LGBT community back then. And they purchased a lot of these establishments, turned them into gay bars. But unfortunately, what they did was they would upcharge for watered down drinks. They would take advantage knowing that these people had no place else to go. They would also resort to extorting some of the wealthy clientele by threatening to out them to their employers and to their family. Even though these establishments were Mafia owned, they often had to pay off the police to prevent them from being raided. And even with the payoffs, or if they were behind on the payoffs, the police would still raid these gay bars and often arrest the patrons and the employees. So on June 28th, 1969, the Stonewall Inn was raided by police, and they began arresting some of the workers and the patrons. But this time, instead of backing down, the crowd surrounded them and they started throwing coins. And this was to mock them for taking bribes and being paid off. What is said to have sparked the riots was when a butch lesbian by the name of Stormy de la Vieri, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, I tried to find the correct pronunciation and couldn't find it anywhere. But when she was being arrested and they were trying to shove her into a cop car, she fought back and yelled out, and then the crowd responded, and everything escalated, and they went from throwing coins to throwing stones and bottles, and things quickly turned violent. The police responded by pulling out their batons and beating members of the crowd, and everything quickly got out of control. It was a very gay-friendly neighborhood, and there were other establishments nearby, and people heard about and saw what was going on, and the crowd quickly grew to over 2,000 people. The police actually went inside the Stonewall Inn and barricaded themselves in. The crowd took a broken parking meter and tried to use it as a battering ram to break into the inn. They threw a Molotov cocktail at the building trying to get the police out. And the police called for backup, and what was sent was something that was referred to as the Tactical Patrol Force. And this was like a riot control type special unit. And this went on all the way until like 4 or 5 a.m. And the crowd basically refused to back down. Then after the initial night, they came back again that night, and everything again, this all erupted again. Thousands of people showed up, and there were these huge riots, and they were demanding fair treatment and demanding, the end to police harassment and violence and all of those things. Well, this went on for several days, and that's what became known as the Stonewall Inn Riots, or Uprising it's sometimes referred to. And this was a huge spark that ignited what was referred to back then as the gay movement in America and actually all over the world. Before the riots, there were approximately 50 to 60 gay groups throughout the United States, and within 1 year, there were over 1,500. Within 2 years, there were over 2,500. This spawned significant organizations like the Gay Liberation Front, or the GLF, and the GAA, which is the Gay Activist Alliance. Another organization that was formed was called STAR, and this was the Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries in New York City. This was actually started by Marsha P Johnson and her friend Sylvia Rivera. Sylvia was what we refer to today as a transgender woman, and she was of Puerto Rican and Venezuelan descent. So what STAR was all about was a home for LGBT street youth, people that were either runaways or had been kicked out of their homes and were living on the streets of New York City. And so basically they started this home that they would take in these youth free of charge, provide them with housing. In turn, the youth tried to obtain food, and it was like a big community. And this was quite common back then in the Black and Latina communities, that they would do these. And Sylvia and Marsha acted as what they were called like house mothers, and basically became these kids' family and took care of them, and they took care of each other in return. On the 1-year anniversary of the riots on June 28th in 1970 was the first gay pride parade. It started on Christopher Street, which was near the Stonewall Inn where the riots had happened, and they walked all the way down to Central Park, which I believe is like 51 blocks. The crowd was said to be, filled the street for 15 blocks. So there was a huge turnout, and it was really significant. There were also marches on the same day in Los Angeles and Chicago. And by the next year, it had spread to many other cities, and including Paris, London, and West Berlin. So this really exploded the whole movement. And this is why we celebrate Pride in June. And, we have Pride parades today. This is all an anniversary of the Stonewall Riots and what they referred to the first year as the Christopher Street Liberation March. Before the riots, the groups that were organized never put the words, gay or transvestite or anything like that in their titles. They tried to work within the system, and they tried to be very anonymous and not draw a lot of attention. And to be honest, they just weren't very successful. So after the riots, everything became much more open and I guess you could say aggressive. The people were basically just sick and tired of being treated the way they were, with the police harassment and violence, and being arrested for just being who they were. Everything became more out, more forceful, and with the marches and demonstrations and demanding action. And like I said, it spurred action throughout the world and led to the liberation movement that we still see today. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, Marsha P Johnson was a key figure in those riots and in the first parade and in this entire movement. She continued to be a part of this movement all the way to her untimely death in 1992. And for those of you that are interested to know more about her, there's actually been a couple documentaries made, and I know the one that, at least one of them can be found on Netflix, and it's called The Death and Life of Marsha P Johnson. Shortly after the Pride Parade in 1992, about a week after that, Marsha's body was found floating in the Hudson River. The police ruled it a suicide and closed the case, but there are a lot of reasons to believe it was not a suicide. She never left a note. She never said anything to anyone about being suicidal. None of her friends or families believed that she, was ever suicidal or had any intent on doing any of those things. But more than that, when her body was pulled from the water, she had a large head wound. There were reports that people had seen her being chased by at least 2 men. People reported that they had heard people threaten her. And there's also other mysterious circumstances, such as the police report surrounding her death actually disappeared and no one knew where it was. And there was a lot of resistance from police when people tried to look into the case. In the documentary, Victoria Cruz, who works for the Anti-Violence Project, was trying to get information surrounding everything, and she was told on more than one occasion to leave it to the professionals and that she should stop looking into this stuff on her own. So as you can see, there were a lot of mysterious circumstances around Marsha's death, which was of course very tragic and leaves a lot of suspicion. And unfortunately at this point, it's unlikely that we'll ever have a definitive answer of exactly what happened. But I think it's important to talk about it, and it needs to be discussed, especially with a figure as important as Marsha was and what a huge role she played, not only in the riots and the movement altogether, but for many LGBT youth in New York City, back in the 1960s and 70s, actually all the way through the 80s and into the early 90s. But yeah, she was a very important figure, and I think people need to know who she was and what she stood for, and how she helped us get to where we are today. So that's everything I wanted to share about Marsha P Johnson, about the Stonewall Riots, and about the birth of the LGBTQIA plus movement. I hope everyone learned something. I hope you were inspired. And I think it's very important to understand what role the riots played. And even though unfortunately there was violence, how that is what sparked, that revolution and the whole entire movement into the changing of the laws and decriminalizing homosexuality and being transgender, and what got us to where we are today. Even though there's a lot more work that needs to be done, we've come a long ways, and the riots is what had to happen to spark all of that and to spark all this change across the world. So I hope everyone enjoyed that, learned a lot. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will be posting more content like this soon. All right, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day.